Welcome to the OddsBreakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to podcast 59 of 2021. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can follow me on Twitter at OBKiev. Follow us at the OddsBreakers and follow us on social media / the OddsBreakers. This episode is being brought to you by mybookie.ag for a 100% sign up bonus. Please visit MyBookie and use the promo code The OddsBreakers. Terms, conditions, and location apply. If you'd like to help us out with our cost, sponsor the website and podcast, we would love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com. Click shop to become a premium member. Just pick any of our handicappers for our premium plays before the line moves. If you'd like to just support the OddsBreakers for our free picks, you can become a patron. And if nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com to become a free picks newsletter subscriber. And we have lots of them, my friends. 1 week is in the books. College football week 1. Last week, I went 8-5 against the spread over-under in my plays. So had a good week, and UFC was good as well. We hit our big dogs, Derek Brunson, and a nice little 2-fight parlay that paid plus 150. So great weekend in sports. Not over yet. We still have one pending play tonight. But I got to tell you, that Florida State Notre Dame game sure lived up to some of the hype around it because that was a fantastic game to watch. It was on an island by itself. We saw some Mackenzie Milton come in. We saw Jack Cohn and lots of fireworks at the end of the game. Such a close game. Notre Dame did pull it out. Unfortunately, my Badgers did not pull it out against Penn State because they absolutely blew some of their chances in the red zone. Kind of interesting. Former Badger Jack Cohn goes to Notre Dame, wins his first game at Florida State. The Badgers switched to Graham Mertz. Looks the same as last year. Sloppy, fumbling his RPO plays, turning the ball over, just crumbling in the red zone. I mean, the same thing as we saw last year with Wisconsin. Pretty disappointed in that, especially when they actually outgained Penn State by a lot in yards. The only way our defense got beat is when Scott Nelson blew it against some of their deep passes. That's the only way they moved the ball, was throwing the ball deep. And it worked because they had 3 big explosive plays that got them in position. So lots to work for the Badgers. Got to give Penn State some credit too. They deserve it. They played very well that game in a very hostile environment. So I do give props to Franklin and the Nittany Lions for that. The rest of the usual suspects played well. Ohio State won. Alabama took care of business. Obviously, Clemson, Georgia, the best game of the night. Very defensive-oriented game. Very low score, 10-3. Georgia won that game. JT Daniels looks like 22 of 30, 1 interception. And DJ Uiagalelei, 19 for 37 and 1 interception as well. But his interception was much worse because it went for a touchdown. So, I mean, that was your game right there. Very smash mouth football. And Georgia's defense is every bit what it was last year, and I think Clemson's defense actually got better. The unfortunate part for Clemson is that their offense got worse, in my opinion, and they only could muster up 2 rushing yards if you take away DJ's minus 22. They just could not run the ball whatsoever. They didn't even really try that much. They were just throwing the ball all over the place, at least with Georgia. Zamir White, 13 carries for 74 yards. Pretty good for them. And that's how, Georgia did it. Time of possession, was able to kind of drain down Clemson and their hopes just by playing smash mouth defense and running the ball. So props to Kirby Smart for that game. But I'll tell you right now, Clemson's not even close to being out of this thing. They can easily run their table and make the college football playoff. And I got to tell you, that makes that loss for Wisconsin a lot harder because let's just say they run didn't lose, and then they lost to Ohio State. they probably would have got the nod, and Clemson wouldn't have necessarily. And now, if Clemson runs the table and a team like Wisconsin runs the table, because Wisconsin has that one loss, they would probably be the outside looking in, right? Even if they did have that big win against Ohio State, just because Clemson would be the higher ranked team coming in. So I would be concerned for that. If I thought the Badgers can run the table, I don't think they can because they're not that good on offense, unfortunately. But it was a great weekend of football. And this podcast is important because we cover what's important and what happened last week from a box score perspective. We look at some of the analysis. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about some betting spots. And then I'm going to give you a free play for college football this weekend. Next podcast, we're going to talk more about the NFL and do, of course, more college football. So stay tuned for the later show as well. This Tuesday morning show normally will have fantasy football, but obviously the NFL starts this week. We already did everything in our draft and, talked about running back rankings, wide receiver rankings, talked about some draft strategy and a few other things. So Dave will be back next week. But as far as this show, we're going to get right into some college football misleading final scores. Now, before I talk about some of these box scores, I want to mention that garbage time can make a misleading score, and unfortunately, it's not really misleading if the team just kicked their butt for the first half and got a couple pick sixes, and then they put the third string in the second half or the fourth quarter, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we try to weed that out. Is it going to be perfect? No, it's not going to be perfect. I can't watch every single game. There's 130 college football teams. I probably watch maybe 8 to 10 full games if possible. I pretty much have it on all day on Saturday, but there's Friday night games, Thursday night games, sometimes a Sunday game. But in general, I flip around a lot as well. So I try to catch a little bit. And then, of course, I watch all the replays that I can find. So what I do is I go to the box score, and when I'm doing my power ratings on Sunday mornings, I look at every single box score to see if there should be an adjustment or not. Because sometimes there shouldn't be an adjustment at all, even if a team got beat and didn't cover the spread. That happens when they just had some bad boneheaded mistakes in the red zone, maybe a couple turnovers, and they outgained the other team. That happens. I'd rarely reward them for that, but there are times I look at a box score and I actually reward both teams rather than take away from one of them and give to another. So it just depends upon how good they did. Like for example, if somebody played against Alabama and got a bunch of yards on them, even though they didn't win the game, they lost the game and didn't cover, there's a chance I might actually bump them up in my power ratings, especially if I, thought the margin should have been bigger. That happens sometimes. So under every box score, you look at the total yards, what they did rushing, yards per rush, yards per pass attempt. Look at that. You look at the turnovers, and obviously try to find out if there's any injuries coming into the next week, because that affects your power ratings as well. All right, let's get into some of these scores then. UCF outgained Boise State 573 yards to 283 yards. They over doubled Boise State's yardage and only won by 5 points. They had a 2-to-1 turnover ratio, and that helped that out, but still, this is a big discrepancy. Normally, you would have won by a lot more than that. But, Boise State had that pick six in the beginning of the game that really made that total a tough one for us to get. We beat that total by 1 point. I think went all the way up to 67. We had under 68, so felt fortunate about that one. USF, South Florida, gained 271 yards, but scored 0 points against NC State. You expect something with 271 yards. The 3-to-1 turnover ratio and bad red zone efficiency hurt them. But, man, that is crazy to get 0 points and to have over 250 yards. Tulsa outgained FCS UC Davis 448 to 399 yards, yet lost by 2 points. That was another of those really bad losses. Washington's in here. Man, some FCS schools beat some some FBS schools. I think there was about 5 or 6 of them this week. I think it was like the biggest FCS week ever, from what I'm hearing. So the 3-1 turnover ratio hurt Tulsa against their game versus UC Davis. North Carolina outgained Virginia Tech 354 to 296 yards, yet lost 17-10. 3-2 turnover ratio did them in too. And Virginia Tech, had a little bit of luck with them as well. Fresno State outgained Oregon 373 yards to 358, yet lost 31-24. A 3-1 turnover ratio hurt them. And Oregon, they one of their big defensive ends got injured that game, but real bad look for Oregon here. Wisconsin outgained Penn State 359 yards to 257, including time of possession, and they still lost 16-0. The 3-0 turnover ratio with Graham Mertz there screwing it up, and awful red zone efficiency killed the Badgers. Penn State was better than I thought, that's for sure. But Wisconsin really, really blew that game in their red zone. USC only outgained San Jose State 416 to 375, yet won 30-7. A 3-2 turnover ratio hurt San Jose State, and little Sparty there. But man, that game was close, and that was one of our losses, San Jose State. The pick 6 that San Jose State threw late when it was 13-7 really, really hurt. They're driving through the pick 6. Spread was done by then. Duke outgained Charlotte 580 to 478, yet lost 31-28. A 2-0 turnover ratio killed them. Central Michigan outgained Missouri 475 to 468, but lost 34-24. A 2-0 turnover ratio did them in. But I do want to say lots of that was garbage yards. So I want to point that out, that I don't want to make this like a big misleading score here. Georgia Tech outgained Northern Illinois 429 to 301, yet lost 21-22. Even turnover ratio. Just bad efficiency for Georgia Tech. Outgaining your opponent by 128 yards, losing by 1. Washington outgained FCS Montana 291 to 232, yet lost 13-7. They had a 3-0 turnover ratio. And just real quick on Vanderbilt, the only reason that they're still in the SEC is because they make the SEC look smart. They're the school with the brains. But I have no clue how they seem to hang around in the SEC after how bad this school is. They outgained FCS East Tennessee State, yet lost 23-3.
That's terrible.
Terrible. Vanderbilt, how do you do it? Next one, Arizona outgained BYU 426 to 368. That's correct. And yet lost 24-16. A 1-0 turnover ratio hurt them. New Mexico State outgained San Diego State 374 to 363, yet lost 28-10. Some of those yards were garbage time too, but still, I'm surprised they were able to put up some yards even in garbage time against San Diego State like that. Equal turnovers in that game too. This next one was actually a listener question about Maryland versus West Virginia. Now, Maryland outgained West Virginia, and West Virginia had their chances, but they turned the ball over, right? I believe the turnover ratio was something like 4-0. So he kind of thought that this was a misleading box score. Well, Maryland outgained them 496 to 325, and they won the game. So, from the misleading part of it is how the hell you only losing by 6 points when you're outgained by over 100 yards and a 4-0 turnover ratio. Having a 4-0 turnover ratio would make you think that this team lost by like 20 or 30, right? And they were outgained. But the thing is that West Virginia might have been the better team. They just couldn't hold on to the ball, and they had better field position all game than Maryland, right? That's what that box score is telling me. It's not necessarily misleading, but just looking at the score and how West Virginia kind of hung in there until they just blew it with turnovers shows that they are more capable, right? They're a pretty capable team if they're, getting some good field position, good special teams play, and just choking it up in the red zone. That's the important thing that you take away from this. But at the same time, Maryland won this game and outgained them. Let's move into college football week 2 betting spots. Now, the betting spots segment is important for motivation. Now, it's not the end-all, be-all. And you might just adjust your power rating on the game, adding a point, subtracting a point, maybe 2 points, depends upon the situation and the amount of an emotional spot it is. That's the way I look at it. But it's early right now. So I'm talking about letdown spots. These teams might not let down at all. I'm just saying it's a spot that you'd be a little bit more discouraged to back them if the spread started to tell you that. So you might need a little bit more of a gap between your number and what the spread actually is. So just keep that in mind. It gets more important later when these teams are tired and the season's starting to wear on them throughout the season. But letdown spots, Penn State could let down a little bit hosting Ball State after beating Wisconsin. It was a big game for them. They were dogs. I know they're a big program. They shouldn't necessarily think like that, but you never know. Virginia Tech could let down versus Middle Tennessee after beating UNC, after beating North Carolina. They could let down versus Middle Tennessee. Georgia could let down some versus UAB. Could be a little bit flat for them. Not sure. It's a pretty big spread. UCLA, big game and big win versus LSU. We were on UCLA that game. They could let down versus Fresno State after beating LSU. That's interesting because Fresno State looks pretty well put together this year. Notre Dame could let down versus Toledo after that tough win in Tallahassee. It's just it took a lot out of them emotionally. Although Coach Chip Kelly said something pretty stupid. They didn't execute well, and they should be executed for that. I think he wasn't thinking during the interview and how bad that would sound. I'm not going to give him that much of a hard time on it. It was a real big screw up of words, but I don't think he meant his kids to be executed, but it just sounded so bad. And a lot of people are pretty upset with Chip Kelly there. So interesting for Notre Dame. Get up spots. Wisconsin better wake the hell up versus Eastern Michigan and use this as like a slump buster after losing that game to Penn State the way they did. Miami, they'll have to get up versus Appalachian State after losing to Alabama. North Carolina is going to get up against Georgia State after losing to the Hokies. Washington could wake up versus Michigan after losing to FCS Montana if they aren't too embarrassed. And Stanford better get the hell up versus USC after losing to Kansas State. That was another free play we gave out last week. As a matter of fact, if you listen to our podcast the last couple of weeks, most of these free plays hit. I think they all actually hit. So just really happy at the success our guests have had coming on and giving out their plays. It makes me really happy coming into the week like that. So fantastic job to all of our guests that we have had. But look ahead spots, Penn State, they're sandwiched between Ball State and Auburn. So it'd be really hard for me to bet Penn State. It would have to be a pretty wide gap in that spread versus power rating. And I will definitely take a look at Ball State to see if they're worth anything because they had a bad week last week too. Nebraska could look past Buffalo to Oklahoma here. Another interesting spot. Now, Nebraska already has that ugly loss, which makes it less probable. But having Oklahoma on deck is something those kids are definitely thinking about. Purdue could look past UConn to face Notre Dame. Florida could look past South Florida to Alabama. Another nasty, ugly dog right there in South Florida. And UConn just lost their coach. Total mess of a program. Going back to the one we just talked about. And the final one, South Carolina, could look past East Carolina to Georgia. Very, very possible. So, my friends, if you have any questions about betting spots and just kind of the way I look at it and some of the ways I adjust my power ratings or actually the game line, my line different from Vegas's line, feel free to tweet me at the OddsBreakers. Before we go, I have a free play for you. And we are playing this pretty big. I actually gave it out as 4 stars at the +4 for Iowa. And I will come back if this spread switches. It's now 3.5 in a lot of these books, going down a little bit. Look, I know Iowa State looked bad versus Northern Iowa last week. That was Brad Powers' free play on our podcast. We played it too, and Northern Iowa could have won that game outright. They had their opportunity. But you're not supposed to overjudge that and overreact. But I'm not overreacting by betting Iowa here because Iowa's always been stronger in my power ratings than Iowa State. They were very close to each other after last week. Now there's a 2-point gap. And so going to Ames, they're going to have fans there. That's not a true home game in this rivalry for the Cyclones. As a matter of fact, I have this game more of a pick'em because I just think Iowa's got some better players and they know how to beat Matt Campbell. They've done it year by year. I'm not going to BS you. I would take either team at plus 3.5 had I had it, right? I even take, when I bet this game year by year, even if it's a 3, I'll take the 3. I'll take the points because that's how close this game usually is. It's always close because it's such a huge rivalry. But having this game as a pick'em, you look at all Iowa State's returning production, they return everybody, but so does Iowa. And Iowa State doesn't win the big games. Matt Campbell is a terrible favorite. It's just the way he's been. Another thing I like to add is that this total is pretty low. 45-point total. Okay? And I definitely wouldn't bet the over in this game, but that just goes to show you that you want to lean the dog when the total is that low. Not a lot of points to not a lot of variance, right? Not a lot of difference between the score is what they're calling for. So just looking at the past here, Iowa has won the last 5 of these games. Iowa State hasn't beaten them since September 13 of 2014. All right? That long ago. So that's how this matchup has been going. It's been going for the Hawkeyes. So I will gladly take the points here, and I have this game more of a pick'em. Will I buy back if I get a clean minus 2.5 later this week? Maybe a little bit. But right now, I think Iowa has a better chance to win this game outright than Iowa State does, in my opinion. So I'm giving out that free play. Iowa plus 3.5 points.
Where's my money, bitch?
My friends, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you could retweet it and share the Odds Breakers. All of our handicappers work very hard. We work very hard to try to bring you as much value as possible. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your week and go get some winners.